Hello, everybody. My name's Jim, and this is an example of a developmental edit that I wanted to show you guys using ChatGPT. I am not the first person to do this. I will probably not be the last person to do this, but I do want to make this into a series. This was the surprise that I mentioned back in a community post sometime last week, either Friday or Saturday. Because I've mentioned being an editor before, I do write and I do edit in my day job as well as off to the side, which kind of sounds a little bit crazy because I do it all the time, but if you love what you do, it really doesn't matter. But I wanted to do this. I wanted to play around with ChatGPT a little bit. I thought that this would be a fun thing to do, and it would be a cool series to have maybe you guys provide prompts for me so that it doesn't look so scripted. I do have a prompt here already typed up that I made myself, and I went with something that was already familiar, at least to me, to be able to provide ChatGPT with specific personalities and a specific example to base a story off of. I just felt that it would be a little bit better for it, a little bit easier for it to understand the assignment and therefore would help me figure out what to edit and what ChatGPT is trying to convey in the story. This will hopefully also alleviate some fears that people have that ChatGPT is too strong and is going to start taking over the author sphere. Personally, I don't believe that. I think the biggest reason is that ChatGPT takes from examples that already exist. While we do take inspiration from other places, it is still very much our story. We craft it. We have that creativity and we have that personal touch that we add to the stories that ChatGPT just isn't quite ready to provide. So with that out of the way, I'm going to jump into the Mortal Kombat Murder Mystery by ChatGPT. The sun had set over the temple of the Elder Gods, casting eerie shadows across the courtyard where the Mortal Kombat fighters had gathered for their evening meal. Sonya Blade, commander of the Special Forces, sat with her back to the wall, surveying the scene. She had a sense that something was amiss, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. As the night wore on, the fighters began to disperse to their respective quarters, but suddenly there was a scream. Sonya sprang to her feet and drew her weapons, rushing to the source of the disturbance. In one of the guest chambers, she found Liu Kang, the champion of Mortal Kombat, lying dead on the floor, a bloody gash across his throat. Sonya immediately set to work, searching for any clues that might point to the killer's identity. She found no weapon, no sign of struggle, and no obvious motive. Liu Kang had been well liked and respected by all who knew him, and no one had any reason to want him dead. As the other fighters began to gather around the crime scene, Sonya called upon her years of training in investigation and deduction to try and piece together what had happened. She interviewed each of the fighters in turn, asking where they were when the murder occurred and whether they had seen or heard anything suspicious. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Each fighter had an alibi, but there were subtle inconsistencies in their story that suggested they might be lying. Sonya knew she had to be careful not to jump to conclusions, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was hiding something. Finally, after hours of questioning and searching, Sonya had gathered enough evidence to confront the killer. She gathered all the fighters in the courtyard and laid out the facts, one by one, until the guilty party was forced to confess. It was Kano, the ruthless Black Dragon mercenary who had murdered Liu Kang in a fit of jealousy and rage. He had been envious of Liu's popularity and success, and had decided to eliminate him so that he could take his place as the champion of Mortal Kombat. Thanks to Sonya's keen detective skills, justice was served and the tournament could continue without further bloodshed. But Sonya knew that she couldn't let her guard down. There were always more threats lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. She vowed to stay vigilant and protect the innocent, no matter what the cost. So now I'm going to move over to Google Docs where I have this copied and pasted. I just wanted to show this and read it here so that you could actually see it on ChatGPT. I didn't want to make it look like it came from somewhere else. I wanted you to see exactly what ChatGPT is capable of creating. So let's move over to Google Drive and I'll show you guys how I edit a short story. All right, so here we are in Google Docs. We have one set up here. The entire story fits within a page, so that's super nice. This might be a little bit choppy because I do need to read over the paragraphs again. Usually I don't do a full read. I go line by line. I do tend to line edit just because I can't help myself sometimes. But because ChatGPT is typically pretty good with grammar and spelling and basic structure, I don't really have to worry about line edits too much. I can focus on the overall, which is basically what a developmental edit is. And then once I touch the document, usually a proofreader will take over and make sure all of the grammar and repetition, inconsistencies, things like that are addressed and ultimately adjusted for the next steps. Typically, as a reader, I don't much care for the word had. In a lot of cases, I probably would not edit this myself. I might leave a note for them just to pay attention to where had is written, especially if it's a consistent thing, just so they can kind of look at it and see if it's too repetitive and see if it could be taken out here and there. For the most part, though, this first paragraph isn't so bad. I don't really care for vagueness. I think that it would be nice if we had a sense of what Sonia was doing with her back against the wall. Of course, she was surveying the scene, but I think that you can elaborate a little bit more on that to define a little bit further what that something was that was amiss. I know they say that she couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there are still some actions that she could be doing to make this a little bit more dynamic and to define that something. Maybe she was taking a head count. Maybe she was specifically watching the people entering and leaving the courtyard. Maybe there were people who weren't talking to her that normally they would. There are a lot of situations where something can be amiss, but I don't like the vagueness of something, and I think that it could be defined a little bit better in this paragraph, even if at the end of the day she couldn't quite put her finger on it, which is an idiom, and I'm not a fan of those in texts most of the time. I think you could be a little bit more original than this. But it wouldn't be me to tell you exactly what to say here. It would just be me encouraging you to add a little bit more creativity to this sentence. So what I would do, I would probably start highlighting over here where it says surveying and just leave a comment that says something like that. So moving into the next paragraph, this is a bit of a quick jump. As the night wore on, the fighters began to disperse to their respective quarters. At that point, I would maybe add a period and give this part a little bit more oomph. So here with this comment, it's really just asking to give a little bit more of a description about the other fighters. Considering this is at a Mortal Kombat tournament, is a scream common? Or, what's going on here? Because it just seemed like there was a bit of a jump. There wasn't much lead up to that, or there wasn't any impactful description of the scream and the atmosphere around it. The scream, which is very important in the now, in this current situation, just fell flat. I would be curious to know what her weapons are. This is fine, but this would kind of give us a sense of time, where they are. Obviously, we know that Sonia uses guns, but this could just give the writer a little opportunity to specify exactly what Sonia is using so that if she ever has to use them in the story, if this story were to be extended, they would be able to describe it in a bit more detail and keep her weapons consistent without having them be vague here. Rushing to the source of the disturbance, I would like to know how she navigated through the crowd, because surely they would have been alerted to this scream too. If she heard it, they would have all heard it. And I imagine if she were disturbed by it and sprang to her feet, there is a high likelihood that a group of skilled fighters who are brave and strong would also possibly rush to the disturbance. I do feel like in the Mortal Kombat universe, there would be people who refuse to run away, just like Sonya. So this could establish a little bit of that as well, and kind of give us a sense of how many people are at this tournament. Again, in one of the guest chambers, I'm just leaving the word describe here. She mentions Liu Kang's body and his appearance with the bloody gash across his throat, which is fine, but I would have liked to have a bit of a description of the guest chambers. I think that this would be a really good opportunity to either describe it as haunting already, or possibly, since the author said that there was no sign of struggle, maybe say that everything was pristine. Maybe it featured white linens and a really light colored wood floor that's now stained in dark red blood. Something that's a little bit more descriptive, because I would like to get the mood and the atmosphere of the Temple of the Elder Gods, and right now I really don't have a picture of how any of this looks. And as I go on, I'm going to maybe leave that as a comment for the author. I'm not going to do it now. There's a lot of stuff that I'm going to miss out now just because I'm making a video. Usually I would spend a bit more time on these, but this should give you a general idea of what I tend to think about when I edit. So there are a few things that are odd in this paragraph here. Searching for any clues. I'm not going to leave a comment here, just because this sentence more or less makes sense. I might need to read it over again once I leave all my comments, just to see if I need to go back to anything and refine some of the things that I've mentioned. But the fact that she found no weapon, no sign of struggle, and no obvious motive, I would have liked for her to at least saw something, maybe a footstep, or maybe she could recall the something that was amiss early on and tie that to the scene itself. Was there anybody who was missing or anything like that? This just seems very vague, and it kind of seems like it's going nowhere. And right here at the end it says, Liu Kang had been well liked and respected by all who knew him, and no one had any reason to want him dead. We also have to go back to the fact that this is a Mortal Kombat tournament. So here I said this is a Mortal Kombat tournament. He may be generally well liked and respected, but in a fighting tournament like this one, it's not uncommon for people to have rivals and enemies. This really isn't even using Mortal Kombat necessarily. This is really just general knowledge about competition and how it works. Throwing a blanket statement out there like all who knew him respected and liked him, that just doesn't ring true to me, especially in the spirit of competition. And if we do want to talk about Mortal Kombat, we know that there are plenty of people who do not like him because he is so good at what he does. I think if this story were to be extended, we would get a little bit more of that, to see more of Liu Kang's enemies, and ultimately that would just make this sentence altogether untrue considering the dimension that they're in. But anyway, we're really not focusing on the fact that this is Mortal Kombat, but it is general knowledge that in a competitive sport, especially in a fighting tournament like this where there is death involved, rivals and enemies are just going to happen, because you're gonna have people who are ready and willing to kill someone else. Okay, so I have a little bit of an answer here to one of the questions that I asked up here. I actually forgot about this sentence, so I'm glad that you're kind of seeing me have some questions answered as I read on. If this happens during an actual developmental edit, I do leave the question where I initially put it, because I do want the author to know that this is what I'm thinking about at that time. So when a question is answered, that's cool. That's good. But I still do believe that she would not be alone for a very long time in checking out the source. I do believe that if there's enough people around and they all heard the scream just like she did, then they would go to the crime scene with her, at least some of them. So in this case, while this is fine, I do just kind of want to revisit that question up at the top where I do ask if she was alone. And this is all fine. Again, this had consistency. I just don't like it. Here, I do have to wonder how many of the other fighters were really willing to give up information. There's a good chance that she also would have recognized some of the fighters if she was surveying the scene, as the author said before. So, of course, those would be skipped in the interview process. So this is a bit vague. I do think that this part would need a bit more description. If you really want a convincing murder mystery, first of all, I would not say that Liu Kang was well liked and respected by everybody and no one wanted him dead and that there was no weapon, no sign of struggle, no motive. Because at the end of the day, you are trusting a crowd of fighters who would win a tournament at any cost to tell you the truth. And I just don't think that they would be willing to sit down with Sonya Blade and spill their guts, especially in situations where they may be allies with some people who maybe had beef with Liu Kang privately. I don't think that they would really be that willing to divulge information to her. I think that this is the part where I would say this whole situation needs to be elaborated on a little bit more. If there was no weapon, no sign, if there was no evidence at the scene other than a dead body, then Sonya really needs to investigate further. She needs to watch different fighters' actions and then from there take action into her own hands. And if that includes interrogation, that's cool. If that includes something else and fighting other tournament attendees off to the side, then that would be something else. If she ends up being captured herself, then that would be cool too. I just think that this part doesn't really work because it's very vague and it doesn't seem very plausible in general considering where they are. So this is something that maybe I would talk to the author about extending a bit more. Again, if this were a longer story, then maybe that would be considered. Of course, ChatGPT has its limitations and it really can't produce something that's super duper in-depth and very long-winded. I feel like with this paragraph, some of it is a bit redundant. You have slowly a picture began to emerge. That's fine. But here, again, it goes back to whether or not the fighters would divulge information to her and whether or not they would lie. Just because if you don't have any clues other than the fighter's word, then of course they're all going to tell you that they weren't there and they're not going to be in trouble. But there were subtle inconsistencies in their stories that suggested they might be lying. Here I would suggest elaborating. So here I said, what were some of the major inconsistencies, and did Sonya recall anything earlier that wasn't true? I'm really going back to this surveying the scene because I think that having her realize her surroundings early on and take note of the people who were in attendance in the courtyard and in other parts of the Temple of the Elder Gods, and if she were to show up in other places at different times, I think going back to this surveying the scene is just really important for really nailing down some of these supposed inconsistencies. Of course, she can't be in multiple places at one time, but it would make this story a lot more intriguing if there was a lie that she caught specifically. Like if she were interviewing a fighter who said that they were in the courtyard at the time of Liu Kang's murder, and that just wasn't the case because Sonya would have recognized that person anywhere. I also don't like this part that suggested they might be lying, because of course those inconsistencies would suggest that they might be lying. I would just omit this and maybe strengthen it some other way. And I do want to know if the inconsistencies are coming from the same person, like the same mouth, or if there were different fighters who were trying to corroborate a story that wasn't consistent among those fighters. Because if that's the case, then Sonya would be able to narrow down maybe who the culprit or the culprits were. I just don't like this. Sonya knew she had to be careful not to jump to conclusions. I just don't like that. I don't like that. I think that could be a lot stronger or omitted. And the fact that she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was hiding something, that's pretty much implied with the inconsistencies in their stories and the fact that they were lying. It kind of goes back to this whole thing where she said she had a sense that something was amiss. It just seems really vague. So here in this comment, I said, pull out the people who were making Sonya feel uneasy, give us some names, and elaborate. We know that she doesn't need to jump to conclusions, so that really doesn't need to be stated. If there was a feeling that people were hiding information from her, then she needs to call them out. We need to know who those people are so that we have our own list of possible suspects narrowed down. And two, in general, and like, listen, I know that I'm the one who created the prompt. I'm the one who created the prompt where Sonya needed to be the one to solve the case, but it would be kind of nice to know how Sonya was able to get away with this, how she was able, if we do go with the interrogation route, which I still don't really agree with, but I can't tell someone that they need to write the story the way that I want them to. How is she able to sit people down and ask them questions? Is this interrupting the tournament at all? It just seems kind of odd that she is suddenly playing the role of a police officer when she is a combatant herself. Like, she may be stepping out of line at this point, is basically what I'm saying. So I kind of would like to know, I know she kind of slid into the position, but it isn't really respectable for someone to kind of butt into a situation and start shining a flashlight in people's faces when that's really not their job at the time. So yeah, that whole setup probably would have been a little bit nicer as well. So here we say, finally, after hours of questioning and searching, Sonya had gathered enough evidence to confront the killer. But we don't know what any of this is. But we don't know what any of the evidence is because you didn't elaborate, you didn't tell us. I know that this is a short story again, but this sort of thing just does not work because I just don't have enough information to feel convinced once the big reveal finally happens. She gathered all of the fighters in the courtyard and laid out the facts, one by one, until the guilty party was forced to confess. So here I would say, why are all of the fighters necessary? Why do they all need to be there? If she knows that some are innocent, it just seems a bit arbitrary to have everybody in the same place. Because that could eventually just cause more chaos and more bloodshed if somebody liked Liu Kang enough to where they would also kill for them. Again, I want to go back to the fact that this is a fighting tournament where people die and they will win at any cost. So I don't think that this is a smart idea on her part. I think that she could handle this a little bit better. Again, it kind of goes back to the interrogations where I don't think that that is the best course of action. I think that Sonya needs to do a bit more investigation, a bit more following. Because if she were to follow someone on her own, that would also remove the need to explain why she thinks that she is the one who is going to solve this crime. And here it says it was Kano, the ruthless Black Dragon mercenary who had murdered Liu Kang in a fit of jealousy and rage. That definitely sounds like Kano. I think that this was the perfect culprit. This was the perfect person to have killed Liu Kang. And I do want to make a note that the slash across the throat honestly should have been a clue for Sonya that it was somebody who wielded knives, and Kano is somebody who wields knives. Now, if you know Mortal Kombat, you know that Sonya and Kano have a huge, it's not even a rivalry, like they both want each other dead. So having Kano as the ultimate criminal is a bit underwhelming if you know the story. It would kind of be nice to have Sonya interact with someone else, but for the sake of this story, for the sake of this short story, I think that this works. The only thing is I want the author to go back up and use the slash across Liu Kang's throat as a clue. Because there could be a situation where, again, surveying the scene, Sonya understands the weapons that the other combatants use. She knows what they're skilled at least some of them. And, you know, at the end of the day, it could just be a red herring. It could be somebody using a knife who doesn't typically use them in a fight, but wants to use them to kill Liu Kang to kind of throw her off. But I think all of that could use a bit more elaboration and a bit more detail so that the person who ultimately commits the crime isn't just some random fighter in the tournament. We wanted there to be a bit more hints along the way. We wanted some breadcrumbs to follow, and we just didn't get that. And the fact that Sonya didn't even use the slash or the gash across Liu Kang's throat as a possible clue, she really should have. She really should have. The method in which someone is killed is always a clue. So yeah, that's just a hint to tell the author to go back and check on that so that things make a little bit more sense later. All of this certainly fits Kano, though. He had been envious of Liu's popularity and success and had decided to eliminate him so that he could take his place as the champion of Mortal Kombat. What makes him so confident he would win? That is a question there. Because I imagine if there are multiple fighters in the tournament, they're all vying to win, and I don't think this is a very good motive. Even though Kano is pretty arrogant and pretty full of himself, I just don't think that this reaction makes sense. Maybe the numbers are dwindling. We don't really have an idea of just how many fighters are left in the tournament, or if it's just started, or even if it ended and Kano was somehow second place. We have no idea how much time has passed, if any, other than the fact that it was sunset in the beginning and now it's, Lord knows what time. Thanks to Sonya's keen detective skills, justice was served and the tournament could continue without further bloodshed. It's a fighting tournament. There will be bloodshed. I mean, that's oof. That's a pretty obvious one. The author needs to adjust this sentence for sure. But Sonya knew she couldn't let her guard down. This is usually left for proofreading, but this should be an M-dash. So I guess this is fine. There were always more threats lurking in the shadows waiting to strike. She vowed to stay vigilant and protect the innocent no matter what the cost. I guess that's fine. That just makes her a good guy. But yeah, so after leaving all those comments, I'm going to kind of evaluate this. Usually what I do is I like to, sometimes I'll leave a note at the very end of a chapter or something like that in a comment, because so far from my experience, the chapters are all together from top to bottom, from chapter 1 or the prologue to the very, very end. So I can't really, go down here and type a comment out there. And plus it would get lost and could potentially end up in publication, which I wouldn't want to do, which I wouldn't want to have happen if no other eyes look at it other than mine, which I hope is never the case. There needs to be a proofreader after me. But anyway, back to what I was saying. Usually, I do leave a much longer comment, kind of at the end of every chapter, just to summarize how I think characters and setting and the overall story could be stronger. Some of these comments that I've left right here are line edit comments, but for a whole developmental edit, I would leave a comment at the end to tighten up Sonya, tighten up why she's in the tournament to begin with, because it does seem kind of odd that she is taking on this police detective role. But the fact that she had the gall to take on this role and, again, shine a flashlight in everybody's face and interrogate them, like, we need a little bit more information on how she was able to get away with that. Number two, I would have liked to have seen a bit more information about Liu Kang. I would have liked to have known Sonya's relationship with him, how they worked together and how they were friendly, because just saying that he was well liked and respected by all who knew him and no one had any reason to want him dead, based on this story, somebody had a reason, and there was nothing really that told me why he was well liked and respected. So that sentence meant nothing, because Liu Kang to me meant nothing. This was not a shock to me. Even in the video games, he had already died once. So, and if anybody out there plays Mortal Kombat, you know that nobody stays dead for long. They always come back. Just ask Johnny Cage. Number three, we do need a little bit more investigation. We need some more clues. We need Sonya to pick apart the crime scene. Tell us about the details of Liu Kang's body that you recognize every day that's different about him laying on the floor. The gash across his neck is a huge clue and would be one for Sonya to take note of. There are so many directions that I would go with just the gash across his neck, and the fact that she was not able to find a weapon at the crime scene. It could very well be that it was a fighter who carried knives with them at all times, which is why I was kind of leaning into possibly suggesting that maybe using that as a clue, and the fact that there wasn't a knife there or a blade of some kind, that could kind of narrow down who she needed to interrogate if the author still wanted to go that route. Number four, I do want the author to consider just how honest these other fighters are, considering they are part of a Mortal Kombat tournament. We know that Mortal Kombat is do or die, literally, but even without that description, we do understand, just based on our understanding of competition, that there would be rivals, there would be enemies, and we need Sonya. And as a participant herself, Sonya would have those rivals and enemies that may not be so truthful with her when she's questioning them. So if something feels off in somebody's response or how they're trying to evade the situation, again, if you want to go the interrogation route, which I would recommend not doing, I would follow those people possibly and check on their day-to-day and explain, how Sonya gets by being sneaky and watching them. That's something that people do a lot of times in mysteries like this, is that they follow people and find their own clues if they're not put in the position of cop and were assigned the role to interrogate everybody by, in this case, the tournament head or whatever. Sonya just, at the end of the day, had a lot of gall to step into this role when people were probably like, who the hell is she? Asking her questions. But yeah, I think those were the biggest ones. I'm trying to think of any other general overall developmental edits that I can think of. But I do think that these are ones that I would give back to the author to refine. Again, it is not my job as a developmental editor to tell somebody that they need to write their story a certain way, because at that point it becomes my book. I become a co-author in some cases. All it needs is a bit more tightening up, a bit more tweaking to make it their story and make it as strong as it possibly can be. That is my goal. If I want to write my own story, then I need to buckle down and I need to write that story for myself. But yeah, if you want to participate in this so that it's not so scripted, I would love to have prompts in the comments that I go through and do little developmental edits for. So if you have anything that you want me to ask ChatGPT to write so that I can edit it, do leave a comment because this is a lot of fun. And this not only gives me a lot of practice, but I do think that this is something really interactive that you guys could have a fun time with as well. So, with all that being said, I have been Jim. You've been great. Happy reading, happy writing, and happy prompting.